No nanny lasted with the billionaire CEO's twins. But the Black Maid walked in and changed everything. Before we dive in, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? Type your city in the comments so we can see just how far this story reaches. And when we get to the end, I dare you to rate it from 0 to 10 because this one might just break your heart. Now, enjoy the story. The door flung open in the middle of a stormy night. Warm light spilled across the sharp, unyielding face of Edward Hawthorne, the billionaire CEO who had never allowed anyone to step into his private sanctuary. And yet before him now, Maya Williams lay on his bed. Two little twins curled tightly against her, sleeping soundly for the first time in months of relentless nightmares. "What do you think you're doing in my room?" His voice cut through the air like steel. In the span of a single misunderstanding, his hand struck down heavy, leaving a red mark across her cheek. Maya did not cry. She did not plead. Instead, she bent down and kissed the foreheads of the children, then walked out of the mansion into the rain-soaked night. On the bedside table, she left behind nothing more than a single note. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will." And that was the moment of destiny, when a single slap on a stormy night opened the door to a CEO love story, woven with heartbreak, tragedy, and the fragile hope of healing. Silence, heavy as lead. Hawthorne Estate, Greenwich, Connecticut. The mansion of a billionaire CEO, yet tonight it no longer echoed with the sound of power. Instead, it was filled with a silence so heavy, it pressed down like lead. Edward Hawthorne, 38 years old, a man whose very name once made Wall Street tremble, stood frozen beside his vast king-sized bed. In his hand, a single note, its words neatly written by Maya Williams, the modest black woman he had just driven away in a storm of anger. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will." Golden lamplight fell across his face, softening the sharp, commanding lines that had always marked him as a titan of business. Now those same features broke under the weight of regret. Because right there, just inches away, Ethan and Eli, his 5-year-old twins who had known nothing but restless nights for the past 2 years, were breathing peacefully in their sleep. Their chests rose and fell in steady rhythm, no longer haunted, no longer afraid. Something 14 nannies, specialists, and doctors had all failed to achieve. Maya had given them in a single night, and he had struck her. Edward sank onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands, the crushing truth tightening around his chest. The mansion around him, gilded and vast, felt suddenly like a prison closing in. All his wealth, all his power, couldn't buy what truly mattered, the fragile peace of 2 children. And tonight, the only person who could give them that peace had walked away out into the rain. So tell me, what do you think a man with everything undone by the silence of his children's sleep? And if you were Maya, would you have walked away too? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's sit together in the weight of this moment. Chapter 1. The Silence of Leaving. The heavy oak door closed behind Maya with a dry, echoing thud, its sound rolling through the vast, marble-floored foyer like the final stroke of a gavel. The Hawthorne mansion, glittering with crystal chandeliers and polished stone, suddenly felt less like a palace and more like a gilded prison she had just walked out of. Outside, the storm raged on. Rain hammered the marble steps, splintering into cold fragments that leapt against the hem of her worn coat. Pulling the fabric tighter around her, Maya descended slowly, her palm pressed to the cheek still burning from his hand. Not a single tear fell. Not a single plea left her lips. Her heart trembled, but her steps did not. She had known enough loss in this life to understand one truth. Crying never changed anything. The only thing she still possessed, the only thing she refused to surrender, was her dignity. From the second-floor window behind her, a muted light spilled outward. She knew Edward was still there. The man of immense power and staggering wealth, a man who could summon an army of lawyers with a single call, had just cast her out like something disposable. But she also knew this the moment his eyes returned to the children. 2 boys sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, his frozen heart would begin to fracture. The rain beat harder, mingling with the sound of her footsteps on the stone path. In her ears, the whisper of two fragile voices lingered. "Please don't go. Stay with us." She had promised them she would, but Edward had broken that promise for her with one merciless slap. The iron gates loomed ahead, tall and unfeeling, like the final line between what she left behind and what awaited her. Maya paused, drew a deep breath. The air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and damp earth. Beyond those gates lay a new chapter, but stepping through also meant leaving behind the two small souls she had just given a glimpse of peace. The gates groaned open, their long screech swallowed by the storm. Every step down the rain-slicked gravel felt like walking not just away from Hawthorne Estate, but back through the corridors of her own past. When the storm lashed against her burning cheek, another memory surfaced, 11 years old, abandoned by her first foster family at a small-town bus stop. It had rained then, too. She had clutched a cloth bag to her chest, watching as the car carrying her new family pulled away without so much as a glance back. That day she had cried, screamed, believing if she were good enough, someone would keep her. But what she had carried away from that storm was silence. And now, 20 years later, under the rain of Greenwich, the feeling returned, cast out, misunderstood, judged unfairly. Only this time she did not cry. She was no longer that little girl waiting for someone to return. No begging, no breaking. She whispered it to herself, a vow etched in rain. The storm pressed harder, its rhythm pounding against her breaths, but her heart was strangely steady. She had done the right thing for Ethan and Eli. She had stayed until peace came for them. Nothing, not even Edward's hand, could erase that. Barefoot now, heels clutched in one hand, she lifted her chin toward the streetlights blurred through the rain. Each step forward was deliberate, each one proof that even stripped of comfort, she still carried something priceless, her pride. The bus stop sat tucked beneath an old maple tree, its dim light flickering across the wet pavement. Maya lowered herself onto a water-soaked wooden bench, her coat clinging to her skin, her shoes heavy with mud. The air smelled of gasoline, rust, and rain. It was no mansion of crystal and marble, but it felt familiar, painfully so. Her cheek still throbbed. She touched it lightly, then let her hand fall. No tears. They would change nothing. She simply breathed one long, ragged breath at a time. An older woman sat a few seats away, clutching a bag of groceries. She glanced at Maya, said nothing, only reached into her pocket and extended a tissue. For a moment Maya froze, then managed a small smile. "Thank you." That single act of kindness in the middle of such a cold night loosened something inside her. Maybe the world still held strangers kind enough to notice when someone was hurting, even without asking why. Maya leaned back, eyes closing, and the image of Ethan clutching his teddy bear, Eli with his thumb in his mouth, their faces soft with untroubled dreams, burned itself into her mind. "They begged me not to leave." She had whispered those words to Edward before she walked out, and now they echoed in her soul like glass-cutting skin. Through the rain, headlights split the darkness. The night bus approached its beams, slicing through the storm like two blades. Maya tightened her grip on her bag. She knew this bus could carry her away from Greenwich forever. But her heart was still inside that house of silence where two little boys slept finally at peace. The bus shuddered as it pulled away from the station, its engine growling against the storm outside. Maya sat by the window, clutching her worn canvas bag, her breath fogging the cold glass. Rain streamed down the pane in endless lines like memories she could never wash away. And in that moment, her heart drifted back to a hospital room years ago. White walls, the sting of antiseptic in every breath. Her 8-year-old son lying frail beneath the sheets, his small hand curled around her finger. "Mommy, can you stay?" That raspy, fragile voice still echoed inside her even after all these years. She had nodded, singing through her tears, staying with him until his final breath dissolved into silence. That memory cut her deeper than any wound. Losing her only child had left not just a scar, but a hollow space no time could ever fill. And from that day forward, she had made herself a vow: whenever a child needed her, she would stay. She would never turn away. Ethan, Eli. Their faces rose in her mind, their trembling voices whispering, "Miss Maya, please don't leave us." They weren't her children, but in their desperate eyes and the grip of their tiny hands, she had seen her son again, the boy who was gone forever. Maya pressed her forehead to the cold window, shoulders trembling. No tears came, only the slow ache of pain gnawing from within. Yet beneath that ache, something stirred clear and fierce. She could not abandon Ethan and Eli. She could not let them grow up with the poison of rejection, the very poison she and her son had once endured. The bus turned onto a long, empty road, but Maya's heart turned back, racing toward the mansion she had just left behind. The brakes screeched. The bus slowed at a desolate crossroads. A few passengers rose, pulling on raincoats, stepping out into the flooded street. Maya stayed frozen, her hands gripping the strap of her bag, her chest tight with conflict. "Go. The farther you run, the safer you'll be. No one can hurt you anymore." The thought pounded through her, but then another voice cut through the storm inside her, softer but sharp enough to shatter the silence. "Mommy, can you stay?" Her son's voice, and with it, the memory of Ethan and Eli pleading through tears. "Miss Maya, please don't leave us." The doors slammed shut, and something inside her broke wide open. "No, stop. Please," Maya's voice rang out, startling the other passengers. The driver frowned but slowed, pulling to the side. The doors hissed open. Cold wind and rain lashed her face as she rose, clutching her heels in one hand. Barefoot, she stepped out, mud splashing up her legs. Every drop of rain felt heavy as stone, yet cleansing, as though the storm itself bore witness to her choice. She wasn't going back for forgiveness, not for a paycheck. She was going back for a promise made long ago to the child she lost, and renewed tonight for the two who had begged her to stay. Through the rain, her figure trudged on, thin and resolute, the soaked coat clinging to her frame. Her steps led toward the distant glow of Hawthorne Estate. This time, her whisper was only for herself. "I won't ask him to believe me, but I will stay, because they need me more than anything. And now I ask you, if you were in Maya's place, torn between pride and the only chance to keep two fragile hearts from breaking, what would you choose: to walk away and protect your dignity, or to stay and keep your promise to love?" Share your thoughts in the comments below. Chapter 2. Finding Maya. The community center sat at the far end of a worn-out street, its flickering neon light humming weakly, as if it might die at any moment. Inside, the walls were patched with faded posters that read, "Believe in yourself and your voice matters." A group of teenagers sat scattered around battered wooden tables, pens scratching nervously at sheets of paper. Some laughed in hushed giggles, others hunched low, writing like they were afraid their words might disappear in a room too bright for secrets. At the front stood Maya, small, slender, but with eyes that carried an unshakable steadiness. Her voice didn't need a microphone. It carried warmth enough to reach every corner. "Don't write like someone's grading you," she told them gently. "Write like you're speaking to yourself. Every word matters, even the trembling ones." A girl with streaks of red in her hair raised a timid hand. "What if I don't have anything to write?" she asked, her voice catching. Maya stepped closer, crouched to meet her gaze, and held the girl's trembling hand. "Then write about that nothing," she whispered. "Because sometimes emptiness says more than everything else." For a heartbeat, the room fell silent. The kids weren't looking at her as a teacher anymore. They were looking at someone who knew that kind of emptiness herself. And then the door opened. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, crisp and deliberate. The air shifted instantly, an unfamiliar weight pressing in. A tall man entered, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, his hair still damp with rain. Edward Hawthorne, the billionaire CEO, the man who once made Wall Street tremble, now stood in this peeling, dimly lit room where tables wobbled and paint flaked off the walls. The teenagers stared, curious, wary, whispering among themselves. What was a man from that world doing here? Maya turned. Her whole body froze when their eyes met. That sharp, familiar face, That gaze, once cold as steel, now cracked, fractured by something that looked painfully close to regret. Her chest tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "This is not the place for board meetings, Mr. Hawthorne." Edward swallowed words catching in his throat. He took a step forward, and the room seemed to shrink around him. "I'm not here for business," he said softly. "I came to apologize." The words hit the air like stone dropped into still water. The chatter stopped. The kids turned to Maya, then back to Edward, astonished. They were witnessing something rare power bending low. Maya stood, rooted, her pulse unsteady, but her eyes unwavering. The memory of his hand across her cheek flashed sharp, but this time, she did not flinch. "This place," she said firmly, "is not for theatrics. These kids know too well what broken promises feel like. They're watching me, and I will not let them see me collapse." Edward took another step. Maya raised a hand. "Enough. Don't come closer. Not in front of them." Her voice was quiet, but each word cut like a blade. A boy whispered to his friend, wide-eyed, "She just stopped a billionaire." Edward's throat tightened. For the first time in his life, he felt small in a room stripped of wealth, standing before a woman who had nothing but resolve in her eyes. "Maya," his voice cracked. "I was wrong. I lost control. I didn't trust you, and I regret it." Maya gave a bitter smile, one without joy. "Wrong," she repeated. "A slap isn't just a mistake. It was you denying me, denying what I gave. Worse, it denied your own sons. Do you know how they begged me to stay? Do you know how they breathed in peace for the first time in months?" Edward's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes glistened, but he refused to let tears fall. Her words pierced through every layer of armor he had built. Then a small voice broke the silence. "Miss Maya, will you forgive him?" A young girl from the class, her question innocent yet cutting through the tension like glass. Maya turned to her eyes, softening, but her tone remained steady. "Forgiveness doesn't come before respect. You can't demand it. You have to earn it." Then she faced Edward again. "And respect, Mr. Hawthorne, begins with listening, not commanding." The air grew so heavy, you could hear the sound of a pencil rolling off a desk and hitting the floor. The kids stared wide-eyed, some whispering, "I've never seen anyone talk to a CEO like that." And in that moment, Edward lowered his head. The man who had never bowed to anyone bowed here in a rundown community center before the one woman who refused to bend. The noise of the classroom faded as Maya stepped into the narrow corridor, fluorescent lights flickering across the worn tile floor. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. But only seconds later, heavy footsteps followed, steady, insistent, like the uneven heartbeat of a man unraveling. "Maya, please stop." She froze, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Drawing a deep breath to steady her voice, she answered without turning, "What do you want? I left that mansion behind." "The door between us is closed." Edward took another step, his voice low, trembling with something even he wasn't used to hearing from himself. "I don't want the door closed. I can't let it close." Slowly, Maya turned. Her eyes glowed with a fragile fire like a candle fighting a storm. Wounded but unyielding. "And what about the slap, Mr. Hawthorne? Do you erase it with one simple sorry?" Edward's throat worked, silence gripping him before he finally whispered, "No, I can't erase it. It haunts me every second. But I can start by listening. Any condition. I'll accept it." Maya's gaze hardened, sorrow and steel entwined. "What I need isn't promises. I've heard too many promises. I need to see you live differently, act differently, and most of all, I need to see those children loved by your presence, not your power." The words cut deeper than any insult. Edward's fists clenched, nails biting into skin, but he didn't argue. For the first time, he only bowed his head and accepted the truth. Maya had drawn a line, and he would have to prove himself worthy of crossing it. The hallway felt suddenly smaller, as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them, a billionaire cloaked in regret and a woman marked by loss yet unbroken, unwilling to trade her dignity for his remorse. A door creaked open. Cold air swept in, and a teenage girl peeked out, her messy bun, half-falling notebook still in hand. Her voice wavered. "Miss Maya, are you okay?" Maya forced a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Go back inside." But the girl didn't move. Behind her, more students appeared, eyes sharp with suspicion. A tall, lanky boy spoke up, his voice firm. "If you hurt her, we won't stand by." The words echoed down the hallway, striking harder than any accusation. Edward froze. He had never seen strangers' children, no less, rise to protect a woman he had dismissed so easily. Maya lifted a hand, calming them. "Thank you, all of you. But it's okay. This is just a conversation." A raspy-voiced girl whispered, her tone raw, forged in old wounds. "Adults always say that. Then they leave. But you stayed. You told us our voices matter even when they shake. So we won't let anyone make yours shake again." Maya's breath caught. Her chest ached, but with a warmth that steadied her. These children cast-offs branded beyond saving were now her shield. Edward's head bowed lower, his shoulders trembling. Their words sliced deeper than anything Maya had said. Because they revealed the truth, she wasn't just a nanny. She was a cornerstone of faith for those who had almost lost it. "I'm sorry," Edward rasped, voice stripped bare of pride. No one answered. Only silence hung heavy, the kind that made his apology feel heavier, more real. Then with effort, Edward drew in a breath. His mask slipped completely, the CEO vanishing. "I'm not here as Hawthorne. Not as a billionaire. I'm here as a father, as a man who lost control and lost you. I'm sorry." Maya stood taller, her voice soft but resolute. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to your sons. They saw how you treated the one person they finally trusted. That's who you failed." Edward's body shook. That single truth cut deeper than the slap he'd given her. Maya's tone dropped lower, calm but commanding. "If you want me back, you start with respect. Not bought with money, not commanded with power. Respect means listening, being present, and never letting fear turn into violence again." Her hand gripped the notebook tighter, her face no longer bearing the scar of his slap, but shining with quiet dignity. Edward lifted his head, his eyes wet but sharpened with resolve. "I understand. This isn't a request, it's a condition, and I will prove it not with words, but with my life." Maya nodded once, then turned, walking back toward the classroom. The students stepped aside, watching her as though she were a beacon. She didn't look back, but her words lingered in the air. "I will stay for them. But this time, no one will ever dismiss that presence again." The door closed softly behind her. Silence returned to the corridor. Edward stood alone, rain-washed air drifting in through the window. The storm outside had passed, but the greater storm would be proving himself not as a CEO, but as a father, and as a man who had finally learned the weight of respect. Chapter 3. The 3 conditions of return. Sunset spilled across the bus station like a bronze veil draped over the worn wooden benches. People hurried past, dragging wheeled suitcases across the cracked tiles, the harsh voice of the loudspeaker echoing through the air. At the far end of the row, Maya sat still. Her old suitcase rested against her legs, her fingers laced so tightly together her knuckles were white. She lifted her eyes toward the glass window where the last streaks of light painted her face in gold. A face that had endured a stormy night, a silent flood of tears held back, and one cruel slap she could not forget. The swelling had faded, but the ache lingered deep and unyielding. Footsteps approached, measured, heavy, impossible to mistake. She didn't turn. She already knew. Edward Hawthorne. Tall, broad-shouldered, his gray suit now wrinkled from a long, restless day. The mask of the proud CEO had fallen away, leaving a man worn desperate. When he stopped in front of her, the clamor of the station seemed to dissolve. It was just the two of them. "I searched everywhere." Edward's voice was hoarse. "And here you are. Maya, come back." Maya didn't rise. She didn't look away either. Her gaze met his sharp as glass, forcing him to lower his own. "You want me to come back? Then listen carefully. I will not return as someone ordered around, doubted, discarded. I will only come back if you and that house are willing to change. Pride clawed at Edward's throat, but he swallowed it down. For the first time in his life, a billionaire who commanded boardrooms with a glance, he felt like a man begging. But this wasn't about pride. This was about 2 children. And though he hated to admit it, it was also about his own heart. The amber light caught in Maya's hair, carving the moment into stone she would return, but only under conditions of respect, of presence, of trust. The loudspeaker announced the next bus, its mechanical voice scattering through the air, but Maya didn't move. Edward stood above her, his shadow stretching long across the tiled floor, half lost in the fading day. He raked a hand through damp hair, swallowing impatience. Maya, tell me, what will it take to bring you back? She tilted her head slightly, her voice steady, low, and sharp enough to pierce the armor he wore. First condition, no more cameras in the children's rooms. Edward's brow furrowed. Surveillance had been his comfort, his way of holding together a life shattered by his wife's death. Every detail controlled, observed, contained. They're there to protect them, Maya. I need to know if anything happens. Maya shook her head, slow but resolute. Her voice fell soft but heavy as truth. No. Those cameras don't protect them. They remind them they're never free, even in sleep. Children don't just need safety, they need trust. They need to know the pillow they lay their heads on is theirs, not watched by cold, blinking eyes. His breath caught. The truth in her words pierced him. He remembered Ethan's hollow glance at the black lens in the corner. He remembered Eli whispering at midnight, "Dad is someone watching me." And in that instant, Edward saw himself not as a shield, but as a cage. Maya's eyes, lit by the dying sun, fierce yet tender, didn't flinch. Turn them off. If you want me back, give them a childhood free of those unblinking eyes. Edward's lips pressed tight. For a man who built empires, it was rare to admit defeat. But she was right. He had mistaken control for love. No cameras. That was the first demand. And he knew it was only the beginning. The grind of tires on concrete echoed through the station, another bus pulling in. Still, Maya sat steady. The sky outside burned with the last fire of sunset clinging to the day's edge. Her voice rang again, quiet but like a bell striking through the dusk. Second condition dinner. No phones, no email, no business. Edward blinked. The word dinner felt foreign in his world of late meetings and cold takeout. Meals for him had always been transactions, signatures over plates gone cold or solitary bites swallowed before diving back into endless work. Maya, I'm the CEO of a global company. Calls can't wait. She cut across him, calm, unyielding. And your children have waited long enough, Edward. The knife went straight to the heart. He saw it, Ethan shoving away his breakfast tray, whispering, "Dad never eats with me." Eli sitting cross-legged outside his office door, clutching a puzzle, whispering, "I won, Dad. I beat it." But the door stayed shut. The typing never stopped. Maya's voice softened, but the weight only deepened. Dinner isn't about food. It's where children learn to tell their stories, where they see a smile, hear a question that matters, and feel that their father isn't a distant monument, but a man who is there. Edward's hand tightened on his briefcase strap. For once, wealth and power felt meaningless. He had never purchased the simple luxury of sitting at the table with his sons. His head dipped. His voice broke. All right, no phones, no work. Dinner belongs to them. And to us. Maya studied him, her eyes gentler now, but still guarded. She knew a nod was not enough. It was a test, the first of many, to see if a man who once controlled the world could learn to be present in something as fragile as a kitchen filled with laughter. And Edward knew this would be the hardest meal of his life, but also the most important. The last light of day spilled across the worn wooden steps of the bus station, a wash of copper gold that seemed reluctant to let go of the conversation unfolding there. Edward stood silent while Maya sat upright, her hands folded neatly on her lap. The pause stretched long, filled only with the rolling hum of a departing bus and the harsh caw of crows overhead. At last, Maya spoke, her voice sharp and clear like ink, drawn in a single stroke across paper. Third condition: house rules. But this time, they'll be written by the children. Edward's brows furrowed, surprise flickering across his face. They're only 5, Maya. Children don't know about rules. She turned toward him, her gaze unwavering, gentle, but so firm he couldn't look away. They know more than you think. They know the fear of raised voices. They know what it means to want an embrace, but be too afraid to ask. They know what it feels like when the bedroom door is always shut. If they aren't allowed to speak, then your house will never be a home. It will only ever be a gilded cage. In that moment, Edward saw them, Ethan's tiny hands clutching blankets in the middle of a nightmare. Eli's hesitant steps pulling back instead of running forward. He, Edward Hawthorne, the great CEO who believed rules born of power created order, was being told by a woman with no fortune that real safety must begin with a child's voice. He drew in a long breath, his throat tight. Then he nodded. Then the rules will be theirs. I agree. Maya inclined her head slightly, a faint curve of her lips, not victory, but acknowledgement. If you keep all 3 conditions, I'll return. Not as someone you command, but as someone who stands beside those boys. Break them, and I'll leave. Forever. For all the ruthless battles Edward had fought in boardrooms, nothing had ever shaken him like this. Yet he knew these simple rules, small as they seemed, were the greatest trial of his life. The last of the sunlight poured across the metal roof of the station, staining the benches in burnished gold. A bus hissed to a stop, its doors creaking open as the smell of diesel drifted on the evening air. Passengers hurried aboard, but Maya stayed still, hands gripping the strap of her old canvas bag. Edward lingered a few steps away, his polished leather shoes suddenly absurd against the cracked floor. In his eyes, Maya was no longer the help he had dismissed. She was the woman now holding conditions powerful enough to alter his life and the lives of his sons. Maya drew a slow, steady breath, then rose. Her eyes held no softness, but no bitterness, either only strength. I will come back, but only if you keep your word. 3 conditions, no negotiation. Edward swallowed hard, his voice breaking out of the tightness in his chest. I'll keep them. She nodded, climbing the bus steps. Her hand gripped the railing, then she paused. Silence pressed down like lead. She turned, her eyes shimmering with something fragile yet fierce. Edward, those boys don't need a CEO. They need a father. The door closed with a sharp hiss, leaving Edward alone in the amber glow of evening. Wind tugged at his suit jacket as his fingers closed around the folded note she had once left behind. For the first time in months, his eyes didn't carry only regret, but resolve. The bus rolled away, trailing dust and the echo of a choice. And there at that old station, Edward Hawthorne, the man of wealth and power, learned the simplest truth: money could never raise a child. But presence could. So tell me, if you were faced with Maya's 3 conditions, no cameras, family dinners, and house rules written by the children, do you believe Edward will truly change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Chapter 4. The Birth of House Rules. The Hawthorne kitchen had never felt alive until tonight. Once it had been a sterile space, echoing only with the sharp rhythm of knives on cutting boards, the hiss of polished pans and aromas that passed through without ever being savored. But now, golden light poured down over the long wooden table. No chefs in uniform, no staff moving silently like shadows. Instead, a CEO in rolled-up sleeves, 2 messy-haired boys fighting over a box of crayons, and one woman, simple in appearance but with eyes burning like candlelight, Maya. On the table, she spread a sheet of white paper, placing crayons at the center. Ethan's eyes lit up. "This is like class," he shouted. Eli clutched a blue crayon, whispering, cautious, We can really write on this." Edward sat across, stiff and uncertain. He was used to signing billion-dollar contracts, yet never in his life had he signed something as fragile as house rules written by his children. Maya's smile softened the air. "This is ours," she said. "Everyone has a voice. No one is too small to be heard." For a moment, the kitchen seemed to breathe. Ethan bent forward, scribbling the first crooked line, "Always knock." Edward's chest tightened. How many times had he barged into their rooms without a thought, believing that being father gave him the right to invade their fragile worlds? Eli pressed his crayon slowly, each letter shaky but certain. No yelling. Silence fell. Only the waxy scrape of crayon filled the air. Edward's hand clenched against the table. He remembered the moments, his anger rising, his voice thundering, two small boys hiding behind doors. Maya touched Eli's shoulder, her voice as soft as balm. "You're brave, sweetheart. These rules matter." Eli looked up, eyes shining, no longer clouded with fear. Edward turned away quickly, terrified his sons would see his own eyes wet. Line by line, the paper filled with childish handwriting, crooked, uneven, but carrying the weight of truth. Each word a brick laid toward a home built not of stone or steel, but of hearts learning to trust again. Ethan hugged his teddy, then wrote, "Ask before hugs." Edward frowned, confused. Why hugs mean love? Without lifting his head, Ethan shaded the letters, his voice quiet but heavy as stone. "Because sometimes I'm not ready. If I'm sad, I want to know it's real, not forced." The kitchen froze. Even the ticking clock seemed to falter. Edward sat there shattered. How many times had he pulled his children close, not for their comfort, but to soothe his own fear? Maya's eyes glowed, proud and tender. She whispered, "Ethan, you just taught your father something bigger than business. Love must be respected, never imposed." Eli thought for a moment, then suddenly beamed. "And Sundays mean pancakes. No pancakes isn't fair." Laughter rippled like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Maya laughed freely, and even Edward, the feared CEO, whose presence once silenced boardrooms, bowed over the table, laughing until he had to cover his face. On the page, written in green crayon, stood a rule as bold as any contract Sunday doused pancakes. And in that sound of laughter, rules became more than words. They became bridges, fragile but strong, pulling a family back together. Edward's hand turned a black pencil over and over as if it were the pen of a billion-dollar deal. Only one corner of the page remained blank. Eli leaned forward, eyes wide with expectation. "Daddy, you have to write too. It's not fair if it's just us and Miss Maya." Edward chuckled, awkward. "I don't know how. My rules are always things like submit reports by 9 or never miss quarterly goals. But this is home." Ethan looked up, serious beyond his years. "Then write for home, Daddy. No shareholders. Just us." The words struck deeper than any boardroom blow. Edward looked at his sons' faces, lit by the soft glow, young but unyielding. And for the first time, he felt like a student, not the teacher. Slowly, he set pencil to paper. His handwriting, usually rigid and flawless, shook with vulnerability. "No yelling first. Listen first." He stopped, voice rough. "Because too many times, I shouted when I should have listened." The boys stared, silent. Maya pressed her lips, tears glimmering but unshed. The man who had once been unbreakable steel was confessing his flaws in front of two small boys. Eli slid a red crayon into his father's hand. "Write another one, Daddy. A happy one." Edward smiled, hesitant but real. He wrote bedtime story every night. The room erupted. Ethan cheered, Eli bounced with his teddy, and Maya's laugh spilled out even as tears blurred her vision. In that kitchen, titles vanished. No CEO, no employee. Only a father learning to be a father, guided by the very children who needed him most. For years, the gleaming stainless steel fridge in the Hawthorne kitchen had been nothing more than a symbol of wealth, always stocked with imported wines, juices, and fine food, but never touched by the warmth of family. That evening, for the first time, it became something else, the wall where life itself would be written. Maya pulled a roll of tape from the drawer, moving slowly, carefully, as though hanging a priceless painting. In her hands was a large sheet of paper covered in a mix of crooked handwriting from Ethan and Eli, the firm strokes of Edward and Maya's gentle script. Eli clung to her leg, bouncing with excitement. "Higher, Miss Maya, so me and Ethan can reach it." She laughed, lifting him onto a stool. Ethan, meanwhile, locked eyes on his father. "Dad, you have to be the one to put it up. Because these are everyone's rules." Edward froze. A man who had signed contracts worth billions, whose signature could alter markets, yet his hand trembled now, holding this one fragile piece of paper. Maya laid her palm softly on his wrist, whispering, "This time, it's not about shareholders or clauses. It's about two little boys." Edward nodded. The tape hissed as he pulled it free, and when he pressed the paper onto the cold steel of the fridge, the sound echoed through the vast kitchen like the sealing of a promise. Eli read aloud, his small voice brimming with pride. "Knock before you come in. No yelling. Ask before hugs. Sunday means pancakes." Ethan jumped in, grinning, and Dad's rule bedtime stories. The room erupted in laughter, all except Edward. He stood still, staring at the childish letters taped to his polished fridge. His chest ached. He remembered the long, silent meals, only the clatter of silverware, never laughter. And now, for the first time in years, the house rang with the joy of children. Maya thought quietly, "The cold wall has finally broken." Edward's eyes lifted to hers. No words passed, but she knew. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a house. He was seeing a home. Night fell over the estate. Rain tapped softly against the windows, but the kitchen glowed warm and bright, the house rules shining like a lantern on the fridge. Maya spread a blanket across the sofa. Ethan and Eli climbed eagerly beside her, pressing close. Edward stood nearby, awkward, holding a comic book the boys had shoved into his hands. "Dad, you read?" Ethan demanded. "Yeah, do the dinosaur voice," Eli squealed. Edward cleared his throat, uneasy. Since his wife's death, he hadn't read a single bedtime story. The pages shook in his hands. Maya caught his eye, nodding gently. "They don't need a perfect dinosaur voice. They just need your voice." Edward drew a breath. At first, his words came stiff, his tone like a quarterly report. But then Ethan rested his head on his shoulder, and Eli burst into giggles at his clumsy dinosaur growl. Something cracked. Edward laughed, and the sound startled even him, light, raw, new. It melted the ice in his chest, filling the room with a warmth Maya had never heard from him before. "Dad, it's okay if you read it wrong," Ethan murmured sleepily. "As long as you're here." The words landed like silk, fragile, but enough to shift the weight of the entire house. Edward kissed his son's forehead, his hand steady for the first time in years. Maya blinked back tears. The rules were already working, not through ink, but through presence. When the boys finally drifted into dreams, Edward closed the book softly and turned to Maya. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving them a reason to laugh again." Maya shook her head, her voice tender. "Don't thank me, Edward. Thank yourself for choosing to sit down, even if it was just one page." Outside, the rain whispered against the glass. And inside, for the first time in years, the Hawthorne Estate was no longer just walls and wealth. It was a home. Chapter 5. Storm at the Courthouse. The sound of polished shoes struck against marble, echoing through the cold, breathless hallway of the courthouse. The air was still, as if holding itself for the storm about to break. Edward walked slowly, his ash-gray suit fitting his tall frame, but unable to disguise the weight pressing on him. He had not slept. His hand trembled not from the chill, but from a fear he could no longer deny, the fear of losing his children. At the end of the corridor loomed the courtroom doors, his gate of fate. Maya was already there, a navy dress, hair pulled back, eyes calm yet unyielding. She didn't look at him, but her presence was enough to halt his steps. Then came Eleanor and James Hollingsworth. Eleanor poised, cold like an ivory statue come alive. James moving slowly, with his keen eyes full of accusation. They didn't greet Edward. They only cast Maya a look laced with disdain. Edward's chest tightened. He had once signed billion-dollar contracts without a flicker of doubt. But today, he felt less like a titan of industry and more like a man standing trial before his past. The bell rang. The courtroom doors opened. White light spilled across the floor, sharp as a blade. Edward drew a deep breath. The storm had arrived. Inside the room was vast lit with sterile neon wooden benches gleaming under the light. The gavel struck. Judge Templeton, a silver-haired woman with piercing eyes, called the court to order. The Hollingsworth attorney rose, his voice cutting like steel. Your Honor, we contend that Edward Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Group, is unfit to raise his children. He is controlling. He is volatile. And there is evidence he has used violence against an employee inside the very home where his children live. The words fell like a hammer against Edward's chest. Dozens of eyes fixed on him. He bowed his head. He did not protest. Then Eleanor stood, her voice trembling but sharp with conviction. Our daughter Rebecca, Your Honor, lost her spirit in that house. And now our grandchildren suffer too. How can a man who cannot control his temper protect them? The gallery whispered. Edward sat rigid, the memory of that slap in the storm burning him alive. Eleanor's hand swept toward Maya. And here she is, a stranger. No qualifications, no blood, replacing a mother's love. Is it fair to place their future in the hands of someone like her? The words cut, aimed like a dagger at Maya's chest, but she did not flinch. She inhaled, her eyes steady, as though she had been preparing her whole life for this. Judge Templeton turned to her. Miss Maya Williams, do you wish to respond? Maya rose. The scrape of her chair echoed. She walked forward each step, sure, unhurried. Her voice was gentle, but it carried clear across the room. It's true. I have no degree in psychology. I am no relative of Ethan and Eli. But I have one thing: presence. The air stilled. Every eye watched her as she turned toward Eleanor, then back to the judge. When I arrived, those boys barely spoke. They didn't sleep. They feared the light, feared sound. They looked at their father with suspicion, and at every caregiver as someone about to leave. 14 came and left. But I stayed. I sat by their beds. I sang through their tears. Not for money, not for recognition, but because I know what it feels like to be abandoned. Silence fell like a shroud. Edward's vision blurred with tears. He remembered Ethan and Eli asleep for the first time in months, their breathing steady, safe because of her. Maya's voice trembled now, but never broke. I cannot promise perfection. I can only promise this: I will stay. And sometimes, for a child, that's everything. The chamber seemed to breathe. Judge Templeton struck her gavel, but her eyes had softened. Hours of argument followed, and when at last the judge returned, the room held its breath. Her voice was clear, resolute. This court acknowledges Edward Hawthorne has made mistakes, but it also acknowledges his efforts to change. Under the presence of Maya Williams, the children have shown clear progress. For their stability and best interest, the petition to remove custody is denied. Guardianship remains with Mr. Hawthorne. The verdict cracked like thunder, scattering the storm. Eleanor rose in protest, but James gently laid a hand on her arm. Enough. Edward bowed his head, tears breaking free. He had won not by wealth, not by power, but by truth, by Maya. She returned to her seat quietly, her eyes gentle, needing no applause. This moment was answer enough. Beyond the windows, gray clouds broke apart, late sunlight spilling gold into the room. Edward stepped onto the courthouse steps. Maya was there, the wind catching her hair. He stopped, his voice thick. You saved me. You saved this family. She shook her head softly. I didn't save you, Edward. I only stood for the children who needed a voice. It's you who must learn how to stay. Edward lowered his gaze. Pride dissolved, replaced only with gratitude. For the first time, he bowed his head, not as a CEO, but as a man. Sunlight draped across Maya's shoulders, and in that fragile instant, Edward understood there was something greater than wealth or power, something Maya had sown quietly into his home. Love, and the courage to remain. Maya's hand brushed the courthouse gate. She whispered almost to herself, a family doesn't need perfection. It only needs someone willing to stay. Chapter 6. The Healing Center. Afternoon light spilled through the wide glass windows of the Hawthorne sunroom. Once this had been a silent reading space, shelves lined with books, sunlight falling on untouched armchairs. But tonight, it pulsed with life. String lights glowed warmly overhead. A whiteboard stood in the center. The long table overflowed with markers, sticky notes, and crayons. Ethan and Eli darted around the room, taping up crayon drawings, a red-roofed house, a meadow full of flowers, a smiling sun. Their laughter filled the air, echoing against walls that had once only known silence. At the head of the table sat Edward. His jacket was gone, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled back. A spreadsheet blinked across his laptop screen, columns of numbers, investment forecasts, familiar territory. But this time he wasn't looking at them alone. At the whiteboard stood Maya. Her hand swept in broad strokes as she wrote across the top, Hawthorne Williams Healing Center. Edward stared, a man accustomed to skyscraper projects and steel towers, now watching something far greater take form. His voice came low, steady, with resolve. "I'll fund it. All operating costs the first 3 years, I'll cover them." Maya turned, her eyes searching his, not in surprise, but in question. "Edward, I don't need you to prove this with money. I need you to prove it by letting your heart lead. Money builds walls, but only love builds a home." The words struck him deeper than any contract clause. He had always managed with control, with precision, yet here she reminded him this was not a project. This was a promise. "Daddy, write something." Ethan tugged his sleeve, pointing to the blank space on the board. Edward took the marker, hesitating. Then slowly, in bold letters, he wrote, "No child eats alone." Maya's breath caught. Her eyes burned as she read the words. And in that moment, the sunroom glowed, not just from string lights, but from hope itself. A vision was being born, one family's healing, reaching beyond themselves into a community waiting for love. Maya paused before the board, her gaze sweeping across the scribbles already there. Ethan's crooked Sunday pancakes, Eli's shaky "no yelling," and Edward's earnest new vow. She turned, her voice gentle but strong enough to carve into the silence. "Money will buy beds, books, walls, but a healing center must be built from hearts, and that heart, it isn't mine. It isn't Edward's. It has to be woven from memory, from pain, from the moments we almost gave up, and from the choice to stay." Her hand pressed lightly to her chest. Her eyes dimmed with the shadow of old wounds, the little girl abandoned at a train station, the mother who once buried her child. Yet her voice did not waver. "I was that child waiting on the platform with no one coming back. I was that mother broken by loss with no reason to wake in the morning. And if I'm standing here now, it's because once one stranger held my hand and said, 'You still matter.'" The room fell still. Mrs. Keller covered her mouth, tears pooling. Ethan and Eli clung tightly to each other as if anchoring against the tide. Edward, man of contracts, man of power, felt his heart twist until he could barely breathe. He looked at Maya not as an employee, but as a light cutting through darkness. Maya went on, softer now, but with a weight that filled every corner. "The heart of this center must be presence. We won't just help children survive, we'll make sure they're seen, that they believe they are worthy. A shared meal, an embrace without judgment, a crayon rule taped to a fridge. That will be the law here." Her words hung like a benediction. Finally, she smiled, faint but luminous eyes shimmering. "If we can do that, then this won't just be the Hawthorne Williams Healing Center. It will be the home for those who were once left behind." Edward tightened his grip on the marker. For a man who had bowed to no one in this moment, he felt small, standing before a heart far greater than his own. The sunroom glowed with strands of golden light strung across its windows, yet the air inside was tight as a drawn bowstring. On the table lay 2 worlds colliding: Maya's handwritten plans in blue ink sprawling with heart, and Edward's open laptop, its screen lined with precise columns of numbers, heart and calculation side by side, waiting for impact. Edward stood rigid, one hand braced against the table, voice clipped and firm. "We can't build this on feelings alone. A center needs structure, schedules, cameras, supervision. I won't let a single failure undo this." Maya lifted her eyes, the string lights reflecting in their steady fire. Edward, those same cameras and rules are what kept Ethan and Eli from ever sleeping peacefully. We're not building a barracks. We're building a home. Homes are not guarded, they're held. His jaw clenched, fists curling. This was Edward Hawthorne, the man who once bent entire companies to his will, who never allowed anyone to veer from his orbit. Yet for the first time he was being challenged not by power, but by truth. If we're too soft, Maya, it will all collapse. I've watched projects fall apart because there was no discipline. She stepped closer, her voice low, but cutting through the air like glass. And I've watched children fall apart because no one believed in them. Discipline doesn't build trust, Edward. Presence does. Ethan tugged at Maya's sleeve, his voice small but steady. Miss Maya's right. I hate the cameras in my room. The simple confession drove like a blade through Edward. He looked at his sons, their eyes pleading, weary but painfully honest. In that moment he saw it, what he called protection had been their prison. Edward dropped the pen from his hand and sank into the chair, voice roughened with surrender. Then show me how to stay. Maya's gaze softened, but her tone stayed strong. Not for me, Edward. For them. And yes, this won't be the last time we argue, but I promise, I'll always stay to argue with you. Silence wrapped the room, broken only by the hum of string lights, bearing witness to the first fragile truce. That night, the Hawthorne kitchen rang with life it had never known. Once it was nothing but polished marble and the quiet footsteps of staff, but under the glow of a crystal chandelier, the long walnut table transformed into a wall of paper blank, waiting for laws of the heart. Maya taped the sheet across the fridge, setting a box of crayons at the center of the table. Ethan and Eli scrambled onto tall chairs, their faces shining with mischief and anticipation. Edward stood behind them, sleeves rolled up, his face still stiff, but his eyes softer. All right, Maya smiled, handing Ethan a green crayon. What's our first rule? Ethan shot his hand up like a boy in class. Knock before you come in. He scribbled the words, proudly, crooked letters marching across the page. Eli leaned over, sketching a little door with a hand knocking beside it. Edward's lips twitched into a half smile. He'd never imagined his children could beam like this over a sheet of paper. Second rule, Maya prompted. Eli lifted a red crayon. No yelling. Unless it's for soccer, Ethan shouted, and the kitchen burst into laughter. Maya nodded, grinning. Fair enough. But no yelling when someone's sad. Edward stepped forward, then taking a black marker. Slowly, deliberately, he wrote, No one eats alone. The room stilled. Maya's gaze lingered on him, her breath catching. It wasn't just a rule, it was a vow. Ethan's face grew serious. His voice dropped to a whisper. Then Mommy won't have to eat alone in heaven anymore, right? The silence hit like a wave. Maya's hand found his shoulder, steadying her trembling voice. Edward bowed his head, hiding the tears brimming in his eyes. More rules followed one by one. Ask before hugs. Sunday. Pancakes. One story every night. Each one fell like a stone laid into foundation. Not of stone and steel, but of laughter, crayon strokes, and tears unspoken. By the time the list was finished, the kitchen was no longer just polished walls and shining surfaces. It was a house reborn, its laws not written in contracts, but in love. The last stroke of crayon stilled. The sheet of paper, once blank, was now alive with crooked letters and scattered colors, green, red, yellow, black. Tiny drawings of a door, a stack of pancakes, an open book. Each mark a testament to childhood wishes finally heard. Maya smoothed the edge of the page with her hand, her voice tender. All right, who's gonna hang it up? Eli leapt from his chair, his small feet thudding against the wooden floor. Me, I want to. Edward rose, reaching into a drawer for tape. He tore off a strip, then knelt, placing it carefully into his son's eager hand. For the first time in his life, a man accustomed to signing contracts worth hundreds of millions, he lowered himself, steadying a trembling paper in the hands of a boy. Ethan gripped the other side. Together, the twins stretched upward, balancing on tiptoes. Maya laughed softly, sliding a chair over for them. Edward lifted Eli with ease, his broad hand secure around the boy's waist, while Ethan climbed onto the chair to press the corner flat. Click. The faintest sound echoed as the page sealed against the shining surface of the refrigerator. And suddenly, the kitchen fell silent. Crystal light glimmered overhead, reflecting the childlike scrawl, now glowing with more power than any decree. Ethan's voice broke the hush, so quiet it was almost fragile. Now, we finally have a real home. The words pierced through Maya's chest like a needle through silk. Tears rose, stinging her eyes. She turned quickly, pretending to tidy the crayons, but her hands shook. Edward didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the paper. The icy walls of his gaze, hardened over years of grief and power, melted into something nameless, something raw. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice low, almost a vow. Yes, from now on, this is our home. His eyes met Maya's. No words passed, only the quiet acknowledgement that she was the one who had made this possible. Outside, the golden string lights quivered against the window pane, scattering reflections like falling stars. Inside, 3 adults and 2 children stood before a single sheet of paper, fragile, clumsy, written in crayon. Yet it shone like the constitution of a new family, a family not built on perfection, but on presence, on hope, on love. So I ask you, if you stood before a sheet of paper, taped in a kitchen filled with the little rules of children, would your eyes fill with tears? Share your feelings in the comments below. You never know whose heart might be touched by your story. Chapter 7. Belle, the one who was seen. Late at night, the art room of the Hawthorne Williams Center still glowed under warm golden lights. The air was thick with the scent of oil paint and damp paper, a strange mix of suffocation and longing. In the corner sat Belle, knees drawn up, hidden beneath an oversized hoodie. Strands of blue-dyed hair fell across her face, shielding her like a curtain. A paintbrush dangled loosely in her hand, but instead of painting on canvas, she scratched furiously in an old sketchbook. Harsh, jagged lines tore across the page, dark scribbles that chewed up the white space. She wasn't creating. She was trying to disappear. The door creaked open. Maya slipped inside her canvas shoes, making no sound, only carrying a hush of warmth into a room drowning in defiance. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she lowered herself into a wooden chair a few feet away, close enough to be present, far enough not to intrude. It's late. Maya's voice was gentle, almost a whisper. Aren't you tired yet? Belle didn't lift her head. I don't have a mom to tell me bedtime. Maya smiled softly. She didn't argue. You're right. But here we rest because our bodies need it. Painting at night, it wears you out. Silence. Only the scratch of pen against paper. Then slowly Maya pulled a small sketchbook from her bag. She flipped it open and began to draw clumsy lines, forming a crooked flower, a lopsided house. Belle's brow furrowed. She peeked sideways, a hint of annoyance. That's terrible. Maya laughed, the sound light as wind. It is. I've never been good at drawing, but sometimes it's not about beauty. Sometimes it's about being brave enough to let it show. Belle's pen stopped just for a heartbeat. But in that pause, the first crack appeared in her wall of silence. The room held its breath, one girl drawing to escape, one woman drawing to be heard. In the stillness, the distance between them shrank inch by fragile inch. The next day, gray skies pressed against the windows. Rain tapped lightly on the glass, mingling with faint music from an old radio Mrs. Keller had left behind. Belle sat at the long table, her head bent over a half-finished painting, a bird trapped in a cage of black iron bars. Harsh strokes, splintered edges, a mirror of her own unrest. Maya entered quietly, carrying a small tray, freshly baked rolls, and steaming cocoa. How about this? She said gently. We finish painting. Then we eat. Belle said nothing. Her eyes locked on the canvas. And then suddenly she tore it from the easel, ripping it once, twice, over and over until scraps littered the table like fallen feathers. I don't need anyone's praise. Belle's voice cracked hoarse with anger. No one wants to keep this anyway. Maya stayed silent. She stooped, picked up a single scrap, a fragment of a wing half-formed still reaching. She held it up, studying it as if it were priceless. "This wing," she said softly, "it's beautiful. It deserves to fly." Belle let out a bitter laugh, her eyes flashing defiance. "Beautiful for what no one wants to look." Maya placed the scrap gently into Belle's palm. "Not everyone knows how to see. But that doesn't make the wing less real. And it doesn't make you too much. It only means you haven't yet met the person willing to look long enough." The words struck deep. Belle turned her head quickly, hiding the tear that slipped before she could stop it. In that dim golden room, a fragile moon of feeling appeared, a fleeting moment where Belle, for the first time, allowed someone to glimpse the pain she had hidden away. A crack, a wound, but also the beginning of being seen. That night, the hallways of the center were hushed, lit only by a wash of golden light spilling onto the wooden floors. Rain tapped softly at the windows. Inside the art room, Maya gathered brushes still stained with color. She thought Belle had gone to bed until she turned and saw the girl standing in the doorway, green eyes shadowed like a storm about to break. "You think you understand me?" Belle's voice was sharp, trembling, breaking through the silence like glass under strain. Maya set the brush aside. She didn't answer right away. She waited, allowing Belle to step forward, the damp scent of her rain-soaked hoodie drifting into the room. They all said the same thing. Belle's voice cracked. "Foster parents, teachers, therapists. I see you." And then they left. Every single one. "In the end, I'm still just the kid everyone throws away." The words fractured, jagged with grief. Maya moved closer, her voice low but steady. "My brother once told me something, Belle. Not everyone leaves because you're unworthy. They leave because they aren't strong enough to stay." Belle bit her lip hard, her shoulders trembling. "And if I lose it, if I smash everything in this room, would you still say you'd stay?" Maya held her gaze. She let the silence breathe, then answered clear as a vow. "You can try, but whatever you do, you won't push me away. I'm not here to fear you. I'm here to see you, even the parts you try to bury under the rubble." Belle's eyes flickered, no longer pure defiance, but pain, long imprisoned, suddenly named aloud. She turned her face away, voice rough with warning. "Don't promise you'll stay, if you're just going to leave like the rest." Maya's smile was small, but her eyes were unwavering. "I don't promise. I choose." In that moment, the room felt split open like a cracked vase mended with gold. A fracture, yes, but also the first shimmer of trust. The following night, the center was quiet again. Most of the other teens had retreated to their rooms. Only the art room glowed, its windows spilling yellow light into the rain-dark night. Maya walked in and stopped. Belle was already there, seated at the table, bent over a fresh canvas. No jagged lines this time, no torn pages. Her strokes were slow, hesitant, but tender. On the canvas stretched a barren field. In the middle sat a small girl curled into herself beneath a sky bruised purple and blue. From far above, a single thread of light fell fragile as silk, wrapping softly around her. Maya said nothing. She simply sat across from Belle, letting the silence hold, letting the painting speak. An hour later, Belle dropped her brush, exhaling as though emptied. "Don't ask me what it is. It's nothing, nothing worth showing." Maya rose, studied the canvas with care. Her voice came gentle, reverent. "This is your heart. It doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to breathe." Belle blinked, lashes trembling. "If I showed this to someone else, they'd just laugh. They'd say, 'Another broken kid begging for pity.'" Maya shook her head, her voice firm. "No, this isn't pity. This is truth. And Belle, your truth has its own beauty. Don't you see, even in the darkest sky, the light still found you?" Belle didn't answer, but for a fleeting second her eyes shimmered as though she too had caught sight of that sliver of light. The room felt warmer then, as if a candle had been lit after years of cold. It wasn't just a painting Belle had chosen not to destroy. It was the first whisper of her heart spoken at last after a silence too long endured. The art room lay hushed beneath the dim glow of a single desk lamp, its light spilling across a half-finished canvas. Belle sat there, her hands locked tightly together as if holding her heart in place so it wouldn't fall apart. Maya moved quietly, draping a thin blanket over her shoulders before settling beside her. For a long moment, silence held the room. Then Belle's voice broke it, shaky, but burning with defiance. "I hate this feeling, Maya. I hate painting something, only to be terrified people will leave after seeing it. I'm used to it. Everyone who says they'll stay always leaves. And I can't survive another time." Maya tilted toward her eyes, deep and steady, as if cradling every fracture Belle tried to hide. "Belle, you're not too much. You've never been too much. You just haven't met the one strong enough to stay and listen. And this time, you're not alone." Belle gave a bitter laugh, but tears streaked down her cheeks anyway. "Are you sure? Because if I disappoint you, you'll leave too. Everyone does." Maya didn't answer with words. She wrapped her arms around Belle. No rush, no force, just held her steady and fierce until the trembling girl slowly leaned against her shoulder. For the first time, a wall within Belle cracked open. Maya whispered into the quiet, each word sharp and certain as truth. "Listen to me, Belle. You are enough. You don't have to change to be worthy of staying. Here you'll be seen. Here you'll belong. And no storm will drive me away." Belle broke sobbing into the silence. But beneath her tears, something fragile was born, a seed of trust, small but real, pressing through the dark. The art room held its stillness, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and the rhythm of two hearts daring to find each other in a fragile truth. And now, I ask you, have you ever feared you were too much to be loved? And if someone looked you in the eye and said, "You are enough," how do you think your heart would change? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your story may be the light someone else is waiting for tonight. Chapter 8. Waves of the media dawn had barely broken when chaos gathered outside the gates of the Hawthorne Williams Center. Dozens of reporters jostled for space cameras, flashing microphones thrust forward, hand-painted signs rising above the crowd. A false center. Maya Williams. Truth or fraud? The scene looked less like a morning press call and more like a public trial. Maya slowed her car at the corner, her chest tightening at the sight. She didn't step out immediately. Her hands clutched the wheel until her knuckles turned white, her vision blurring. The anonymous blog post had spread like wildfire, claiming she had no credentials, accusing Edward of covering it all with money, calling Belle a mere media pawn dressed up to polish the center's name. In the back seat, Belle sat pale, swallowing hard, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Let them talk, Maya. I've heard worse. I can take it." Maya turned, her voice firm but tender. "No, Belle. You don't have to take another wound. No one has the right to use you as a weapon to destroy what we've built." Outside, the storm grew louder. "Maya Williams, did you lie about your background? Edward Hawthorne, did you hire unqualified staff to work with children? Belle Harris, are you being forced to speak for publicity?" Edward's hand landed on Maya's shoulder, steady, his voice low but resolute. "Don't let them control the story. We'll tell it in our own words." Maya drew a breath. For the first time, she didn't feel alone under the glare of judgment. When she pushed open the car door, the flashbulbs ignited like lightning against the morning mist. Her hair caught the pale sunrise as she stepped out, back straight, eyes lifted. The questions came like hailstones, pelting, merciless. But she stood ready. Edward stepped out behind her, slightly to the side, close enough to shield, but letting her lead. This was not the billionaire CEO's story to tell. This belonged to Maya, to Belle, to every child within those walls. A young reporter shouted above the chaos, "Maya, do you admit you're not a licensed psychologist? What gives you the right to care for these kids?" Maya held her silence. Her eyes swept the sea of faces, then found Belle. The girl trembled, but her chin lifted. And before anyone could stop her, Belle stepped forward. The cameras swung. The crowd fell into a charged hush. Belle's voice shook at first, but each word cut clear through the air. "My name is Belle Harris. I'm 16. They say I'm just a media puppet. but no one forced me to be here. I stand here because for the first time in my life someone saw me. When everyone else called me worthless, dangerous, Maya told me, "You are not too much. You are enough, and you belong." The crowd froze. Even the clicking shutters stalled for a heartbeat. A 16-year-old girl, shadows still under her eyes from sleepless nights, had spoken a declaration more powerful than any PR statement, truth from the rawest part of her heart. Edward's gaze slid toward Maya, his shoulders so often tense with power plays and market wars softened. He leaned just close enough for her to hear voice trembling with awe. This is the one truth money can never buy." Maya inhaled deeply, then stepped forward. The microphones pressed in close, waiting. She knew this moment would decide everything. Either the world would collapse on them or light would cut through the dark once and for all. The noon sun blazed over the crowd outside the center. Cameras snapped relentlessly, every lens hungry to dissect the rise and fall of Maya's breath. Yet she did not flinch. She did not hide. Her fingers brushed the silver bracelet at her wrist, a keepsake from her mother, a reminder that the past may wound, but it was never meant to be erased. With Belle beside her, Maya stepped forward. Her voice carried not loud, not sharp, but steady, each word carved into the air like stone. "You ask if I have degrees. You're right, I don't have a framed certificate to hang on a wall. But I have something that 14 doctors, 14 specialists, and 14 nannies who all walked out of that mansion never had. I had presence. I stayed. I didn't leave when the boys cried. I didn't lose patience when they screamed. And I wasn't afraid when the darkness came. I stayed." The clamor stilled. Fingers hovered over keyboards, trembling under the weight of what they'd just heard. Maya pressed on her gaze, cutting not at the reporters, but into the unseen homes, watching through their screens the mothers, the fathers, the children, desperate for hope. "I set 3 rules the moment I returned to that house. 1, no cameras in their rooms, because true safety isn't surveillance, it's trust. 2, every dinner must have their father at the table, because children need presence, not presents. 3, the rules of the house would be written by the children themselves, so they would know their voices mattered." Her tone softened, her eyes shimmering but dry. "If that is my crime, then I am guilty. Guilty of loving children not born of my blood, guilty of staying when no one required me to. And if love is a crime, then I will remain guilty." Again and again. A hush swept the crowd. Then from the edges where parents stood among the onlookers came applause. Hands clapped through tears. Belle's hand tightened around Maya's, whispering, "They heard you." Behind them, Edward stood, his CEO's armor gone. His gaze softened for the first time in years, as if the burden he'd carried had finally been shared. But the silence broke when a reporter in a dark suit pushed forward, voice sharp as glass. "And what about you, Belle Harris? A troubled teen branded uncontrollable. Are you simply an emotional prop to tug the public's sympathy? Can you swear this place actually saved you? Or is this all a show?" The crowd erupted, cameras whirring back toward the 16-year-old girl. Belle's hands gripped the frayed edge of her hoodie, her flame of defiance flickering under the gale of doubt. Edward stepped forward at once, his voice thunderous. "That question crosses the line. She is not here to be exploited for spectacle." But Maya touched his arm, gently shaking her head. Her eyes found Belle's, not commanding, not pleading, only reminding you choose. Belle inhaled, trembling. Then, before the glare of countless lenses, her voice emerged, cracked but resolute. "I was called too much, too angry, too broken, too unworthy. But here someone told me, you are not too much. You are enough, and you belong." The words pierced the air, cameras lowered. One reporter's eyes brimmed with tears. Belle's voice grew stronger, anchored by her truth. "If anyone thinks this is performance, I can't act my scars. Here, I've painted myself again in colors I chose, and for the first time in my life, I believe I am worthy of love." Applause burst like thunder, unstoppable now. Maya wrapped her arms around Belle, holding her in full view of the world. Edward turned away briefly, his vision blurred, whispering in awe. She's done what no power on earth could do. She's made a child feel seen. And in that instant, the tidal wave of media no longer drowned them. It lifted them, turned the storm into a current strong enough to carry truth into the light. The applause faded into an uneasy hush. From the crowd, a female reporter rose, her eyes hesitant yet sharp, her voice laced with challenge. If this center is truly what you claim, then where is the proof? You have no degrees, no license. What certifies the safety of these children? The air tightened again, taut as a drawn string. But this time, Maya did not flinch. She stepped toward the small wooden podium outside the center's gates. Her voice was not loud, but each syllable struck like a seal pressed into wax proof. Look at the children. She gestured gently. Behind her, Belle stepped forward, and then from the doorway, Ethan and Eli bounded out, each clutching bright sheets of crayon-marked paper. The crowd stilled. The cameras zoomed in. Scrawled across the pages were words shaky but radiant. Always knock before coming in. No yelling. Ask before hugs. Sunday means pancakes. Maya lifted her gaze, her eyes alight with quiet fire. This is proof. When I arrived, these boys could not sleep through the night. They trusted no adult. Now they can write rules for a home with their own hands. They are respected. They laugh. They are safe. They belong. Tell me what certificate measures that heavy silence fell. Then Ethan held up his paper. In the center was a crooked house, and inside it a red heart drawn too big for the lines. His voice shook, but it carried across the sea of microphones. Maya stayed, even when everyone else left. 1 second, 2. And then the sound broke. Applause, fierce and unrestrained, rippled like thunder across the crowd. Not the polite clapping of protocol, but something deeper, raw. Cameras lowered. A few reporters bowed their heads, their eyes wet. Edward stepped forward, standing beside Maya. His voice no longer carried the weight of a CEO, but the tenderness of a father. Money cannot buy a child's trust. But Maya did what no one, not even I, ever could. She stayed. And if the world insists on calling that unqualified, then perhaps it's time we redefine what qualification means. The crowd erupted. Applause rolled like waves against the stone steps. The flashes still burned, but now they glimmered, not with suspicion, but as lights recording the birth of a new truth. Maya leaned toward Belle, whispering softly, "Do you see, when you stand tall, the world must bow to listen?" Belle smiled, still damp with tears, but radiant. Her gaze lifted toward the night sky where the first stars had begun to pierce through the dark. And that is how a woman, once dismissed as unworthy, turned the storm of media into a beacon of light, proof that staying loving and being present could rewrite the very definition of worth. So I ask you, would you have the courage to stand before a wall of cameras and declare, "I am enough. I belong"? Share your heart in the comments, because your truth might just be the healing someone else needs. Chapter 9. Hall of Resilience. The grand opening day. The long corridor of the center shimmered beneath golden light, its pale walls lined not with flawless paintings, but with shards of pottery, fractured sculptures, each piece once broken, now stitched together with gleaming veins of gold. It was kintsugi, the art of mending. Ethan ran ahead, pointing with wide eyes. This vase, it was shattered, but now it's beautiful. Maya knelt, brushing a hand through his hair. That's right, sweetheart. In Japan, they believe the cracks are not something to hide, but something to honor with gold, because the broken parts tell the most powerful story. Edward lingered beside a stone statue, tracing a finger along a jagged seam that glittered under the lights. His voice dropped, almost as if speaking only to himself. Maybe we're the same. The mistakes, the wounds, they don't make us less. They're the reason we become who we are today. The golden light poured across the walls, scattering like constellations born from scars. In that moment, the hall wasn't just an exhibition, it was a declaration. We are resilient because we have been broken. Belle stood frozen before a glass frame. Inside was the very first sketch she'd ever torn to pieces, the one Maya had carefully gathered, pieced together, and asked an artist to mend with gold. Her fingers touched the glass, her eyes shimmering. I used to hate this, because it proved how weak I was. But now, it proves I survived. Maya clasped Belle's trembling hand, whispering, "Yes, Belle. These cracks aren't stains. They're your crown." Edward stepped forward, laying a hand gently on Belle's shoulder. His voice wavered. "I thought beauty meant perfection. But today, you've taught me. It's the cracks that make us truly beautiful." Tears spilled down Belle's cheeks, but for once she wasn't ashamed. In the golden glow, she was no longer unseen. She was honored because of the very wound she once tried to hide. The crowd stirred when a professor from Columbia University stepped forward. Hair silver, eyes sharp with conviction, he spoke aloud. "We once believed therapy belonged only in textbooks and counseling rooms. But today, this Hall of Resilience proves otherwise. Art, presence, and compassion are their own kind of treatment. Columbia would be honored to partner with you to study and teach this model to our students." Applause erupted. Edward squeezed Maya's hand, and for the first time he stepped back, letting the light fall fully on her. Maya's voice trembled yet held steady as she addressed the room. "We don't teach children to hide their wounds. We teach them to turn wounds into strength. And today, we open this hall to anyone who wants to learn the courage of staying." Ethan and Eli, along with other children, wandered the corridor, fingers tracing the golden seams. One small boy whispered, voice fragile as a candle flame, "If the vase gets to stay, then maybe I get to stay too." Maya's heart clenched. She bent low, pulling him into her arms. "Not only do you get to stay, you are celebrated. Just like these cracks, you are proof of resilience." Laughter bubbled, mingling with the tears of parents standing in the back. Many clutched one another, recognizing in the gold their own fractures waiting to be honored. Edward watched Maya, pride softening every edge of his face. In that instant, he realized she hadn't only healed his children, she'd healed him too by teaching him to see his own scars as something worthy. As the ceremony drew to a close, Maya stood at the head of the hall. Behind her, a path of paintings and sculptures stitched with veins of gold. Her voice was low but resolute. The Hall of Resilience doesn't exist to hide pain. It exists to tell a story that from brokenness we learn how to love. Every golden seam is proof you lived, endured, and rose again. Her gaze swept to Belle, then to Edward, Ethan, and Eli. Her throat tightened as she added, "And sometimes, healing begins with one person who dares to say, 'You are enough. You belong.'" The hall thundered with applause. The golden lights shimmered like a sky of stars unfurling indoors. Belle gripped Maya's hand, whispering with a faith she'd never known before, "If my cracks can hang here, maybe I'm not invisible anymore." Edward leaned in, his voice low, reverent. "You've turned a hallway into a place where people find themselves again." And in that moment, the Hall of Resilience was no longer just an exhibit. It was a promise here no wound would be dismissed, and no soul would ever be left behind. Chapter 10. Staying. Golden light spread across the wide garden behind the center. The sunset slipped through the young trees, newly planted, their leaves trembling with dew. Along the path, small persimmon trees, their roots now pressing deeper into the soil, began to take hold, like this home itself, fragile at the start, now steady with time. Maya stood silently, her hand brushing against the thin trunk. She remembered the storms they had survived, the slap in the rain, the battles in court, the storm of the media. But all of it had been repaid with peace now. Edward walked up, shirt sleeves rolled, no longer the busy CEO, but a man who had learned how to stop. He knelt, pressing soil gently around a root, his hands dirty, but his eyes warm. Every root needs time, but once it takes hold, nothing can pull it up, he whispered. Maya smiled softly, her eyes shimmering. In her heart, she knew these roots were a metaphor for their family, scarred but bound together by choice, by staying. On the lawn, Ethan and Eli rode their new bikes, ribbons streaming red in the breeze. Belle, brighter than ever, wheeled out a larger bicycle, her long hair falling to her shoulders, her smile one Maya had once only dreamed of. Come on, let's all ride together. Belle called, her voice no longer trembling but confident like someone who knew she belonged. Edward laughed, rolling out his bike, adjusting the seat for Maya. You taught me happiness doesn't need to be perfect. So today let's see just how clumsy a CEO can be on a bicycle. Maya burst out laughing. The sight of him, once the untouchable man in a tailored suit fumbling with a bike chain, made her heart melt. Bells rang. Children's laughter echoed. Red ribbons fluttered in the evening wind like small flags declaring victory. They had survived the storm, and now they were riding into peace together. The dirt road cut through fields and flowers, the golden sunlight spilling like silk beneath their wheels. Ethan pedaled fast, turning to shout, "Dad, Mom, catch up." Edward pushed harder, wind rushing through his salt and pepper hair, his deep laughter breaking free at last. Maya looked over, her heart tightening with joy. He was no longer the distant father, but part of the game, part of their childhood. At a bend beneath an old tree, they stopped to catch their breath. Edward turned, his eyes serious yet gentle. We've made many promises to each other, but today I want one more. No matter how busy the week, no matter what struggles come every week, we will spend one afternoon to stay together. No work, no running away, just family. Belle, Ethan, and Eli raised their hands in unison. Agreed. Tears filled Maya's eyes. She gripped Edward's hand, nodding firmly. Stay even when it's hard. As twilight deepened, they gathered under strings of lights hung from the young trees. A simple wooden table held pancakes Belle had made, warm milk, and sweet persimmons just picked. No champagne, no grand banquet, only simple things yet full of warmth. Ethan told stories from school. Eli proudly showed a drawing taped to the center's fridge. Belle laughed loudly, pancake in hand, as Edward recounted his near fall from the bike. Maya looked around, her heart overflowing. This wasn't a perfect party with roses and crystal glasses, but in every glance she saw peace, a peace built from choosing to stay day after day. Edward lifted his glass of milk, solemn, as if making a vow. We're not a perfect family, but we are a real one, and that is enough. Maya clinked her glass against his, tears shining, but her smile steady. Night fell, string lights glowing like stars scattered across the garden. Belle sat astride her bike, whispering, I used to think nowhere wanted me, but now I know. This is my home. Maya stepped forward, embracing her from behind, whispering, You've always been enough, and you get to stay, Belle. Ethan and Eli ran over, hugging Maya and their father. Edward wrapped his arms around all of them, looking up at the night sky, his eyes full of gratitude. In that moment, no distant promises were needed, only the choice every day, every week they would choose to stay. Stay in joy, stay in hardship, stay when hearts trembled, stay because they knew true love does not abandon. The wind stirred the red ribbons tied to the handlebars, fluttering like victory banners. In the soft evening light, a family had been rewritten, not by blood, not by power, but by their choice to stay. Do you believe that staying is a decision even more important than love? That true peace doesn't come from perfection, but from choosing to stay, no matter how hard it gets? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the candlelight for someone still searching. Staying, the courtyard of the center glowed in golden light at day's end. Sunset poured itself like molten gold across the stones, across the rows of young trees just beginning to root. At the center of the stone circle, Edward bent down. Hands once accustomed to signing contracts now trembled as he set a stone carved with a single word, stays. Maya followed, her eyes glistening, placing the second stone with a trembling smile. Healing is staying. Ethan and Eli cheered, each clutching a small stone scribbled in crayon, knock first pancakes. Belle came last, slower, her hands shaking as she laid down a stone etched with a golden crack. Her voice caught, but rang out clear, Enough. I am enough to stay. For a moment, the courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Edward wrapped his arms around Maya and the children, his deep voice breaking. Family isn't decided by blood. Family is the ones who choose to stay every day, even when it's hard. As the sun sank, its final light bathed the stone circle, making it blaze like a rising crown of fire. In that silence, every heart understood they had survived the storm, And what held them together was not power, not wealth, but the simple choice not to abandon one another. That is the message, simple, yet eternal. Healing is not running away. It is staying. Have you ever stayed for someone? For a loved one, a child, or even for yourself? Share your story in the comments. It might be the healing someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 and hit follow so you won't miss the next journeys.